Imagine a tiara so exquisitely perfect, its creators hailed it as the zenith of their artistry. Now, picture it vanishing without a trace, dissolving into the maelstrom of revolution and auction blocks. The story could have ended there, but what if I told you that today, brides from one of Europe's most ancient aristocratic lineages walk down the aisle wearing a tiara bearing the exact same name? A tiara that survived the untimely death of a young princess was hidden from the Nazis and literally unearthed from beneath the ground after the war. So, what is it? A lost Romanov masterpiece miraculously rediscovered, or a mysterious doppelganger with its own equally tragic fate? Today, we'll unravel this tangled skein of tales to understand how many Russkoye Polye tiaras truly existed and which one harbors the darkest secrets. At the cusp of the 18th and 19th centuries, the air at the Russian imperial court crackled with change. The opulent and sometimes unbridled baroque of the Catherinian era was ceding ground to the severe and majestic empire style. Classical motifs, clean lines, and natural harmony were coming into vogue. It was in this atmosphere, seeking new forms and meanings, that the most exquisite masterpieces were born, one of them being the Russkoye Polye tiara. The commission for its creation didn't just go to any jewelers, it went to an entire dynasty whose name was synonymous with supreme artistry, the Duval brothers. Their ancestor, Louis David Duval, had arrived in Russia during the reign of Peter III and managed to earn the trust of the imperial court. His descendants inherited not only his talent, but also a profound understanding of the soul of Russian aristocratic style. For them, crafting this tiara was not merely a trade, it was a mission. And they would later confess that they considered the Russkoye Polye their life's crowning achievement. The inspiration and first owner of this masterpiece was Empress Maria Feodorovna, wife of Paul I. By the time the tiara was created, she already held the status of Dowager Empress, a powerful figure and mother of the reigning sovereign, Alexander I. A discerning connoisseur of the arts with impeccable taste, she desired something more than just another opulent pile of diamonds. She needed a symbol that would reflect not only her exalted status, but also her indissoluble bond with Russia. The concept proposed by the Duval brothers was ingenious in its simplicity and profound in its depth. Instead of traditional laurel wreaths or floral garlands, they chose to immortalize the very Russian soil in precious metals. The core of the composition became golden stalks of wheat, an eternal symbol of fertility, abundance, and life. These were to embody the inexhaustible might of the Russian Empire, its boundless expanses, and the generosity of its nature. The vision was not merely to create a beautiful object. The jeweler's task was far more intricate, to capture in the cold gleam of metal and stones the sensation of a warm summer day, the gentle sway of wheat in the breeze, the very essence of the Russian landscape. Maria Feodorovna desired a piece that was light, graceful, almost ethereal, one that wouldn't overwhelm with its opulence, but rather delicately accentuate its wearer's grandeur. Thus began the creation of a tiara destined to become a legend, and then a phantom. For a moment, let us forget this is a tiara and view it through the eyes of an artist. Before us lies not merely an adornment, but a surge of summer wind frozen in metal, having swept across an endless Russian field. At the core of the composition are several substantial golden stalks of wheat, bowing towards the center, as if under the sheer weight of ripe grain. Every curve, every delicate line on the kernels is rendered with such naturalistic precision that they seem poised to rustle at any moment. The Duval jewelers achieved an astonishing effect. The cold metal appears warm, alive, imbued with sunlight. But the true genius of the masters revealed itself in the details that fill the space between these robust stalks of wheat. These are the most delicate, almost cobweb-fine sprigs of flax. They don't merely fill the void, they create a complex, multi-layered texture, imbuing the composition with airiness and grace. This contrast between the strength and fertility of the wheat and the modest tenderness of the flax was an incredibly bold decision for its era. It conveys a profound philosophy. The grandeur of an empire is forged not only from its riches, but also from the purity and resilience of its people. And finally, the tiara's heart, its greatest secret. At the point where the stalks converged, a mysterious stone gleamed. More than a century later, when the tiara found its way to the auction block, the world's leading experts would be perplexed. First, they would mistake it for an enormous, perfectly colorless diamond. Then, on closer inspection, they would conclude it was a rare citrine. But the truth would prove even more astonishing. The Duval brothers had crowned their creation with a gigantic white sapphire, a mineral exceedingly rare in nature. A colorless corundum, devoid of any impurities, it possessed a unique, cool and profound brilliance, reminiscent of the clarity of spring water or a winter sky. Its value lay not in its carats, but in its sheer exclusivity. Choosing this particular stone was a stroke of genius. It didn't clash with the warm glow of the gold, but rather complemented it, introducing a note of regal serenity and purity to the piece. According to recollections, the tiara was deceptively light. Maria Feodorovna valued it precisely for this quality. It didn't burden her head with the weight of imperial power, but rather seemed to weave into her hairstyle, becoming its natural extension. One can only imagine how, with every movement, in the light of hundreds of candles, light danced on the polished gold of the wheat stalks, flashed in the sapphire's facets, and disappeared into the intricate weaving of the flax sprigs. It was a true jeweler's miracle, where every detail held significance. Invisible settings, perfect structural balance, harmony of forms and materials, everything spoke to the Duval brothers' supreme craftsmanship. They created not merely a symbol of wealth, but a landscape of the soul, a quiet anthem to the Russian land that could be worn as a crown. The mirrored halls of the Winter Palace were bathed in the light of thousands of candles. It was one of those magnificent balls for which the court of Emperor Alexander I, the victor over Napoleon, was renowned. The air was filled with the rustle of silks, the faint clinking of orders, and the multilingual chatter of diplomats and aristocrats from across Europe. And into this hall, brimming with splendor and triumph, she entered. Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna. She entered not as the monarch's wife, but as his mother, as the living embodiment of an indomitable empire. She wore no excessive adornments, just a string of perfect pearls and a few insignia. Her presence was the epitome of regal dignity and restraint. But upon her high coiffure, styled in the manner of ancient goddesses, rested something utterly new, something never before seen. It was the Russkoye Polye tiara. In the dazzling brilliance of the chandeliers, it appeared not as a piece of jewelry, but as a real sheaf of golden wheat, freshly gathered from the boundless Russian fields and crowned with a dewdrop of the purest morning. The effect was like a bomb exploding, but a silent one. In an era when, even after defeating Napoleon, the court still largely spoke French and blindly copied Parisian fashion, this tiara resounded as a manifesto. It wasn't merely an accessory, it was a political and cultural statement. Maria Feodorovna, German by birth, proclaimed through her very presence, "Our strength, our wealth, and our beauty lie in our own land." A barely perceptible whisper rippled through the hall. Ladies whose heads were adorned with fashionable Parisian diadems featuring classical meanders and palmettes involuntarily lowered their gazes. Their jewels, which only a minute before had seemed the height of elegance, suddenly appeared faceless and alien. Foreign ambassadors exchanged glances, instantly grasping the hidden message. Russia was no longer a student of Europe. She herself dictated style, drawing inspiration from her own history and nature. That evening, the Duval brothers' creation transcended a mere object to become a symbol. The stalks of wheat on the Empress Mother's head became the embodiment of the very land that had swallowed Napoleon's grand army. and the cool gleam of the central sapphire, a symbol of the steadfastness and purity of the Russian spirit. The Russkoye Polye became not just Maria Feodorovna's favorite tiara, it became her crown, a crown of victory, fertility, and national pride. The Russkoye Polye tiara wasn't destined for a single triumphant moment. It became the Dowager Empress's faithful companion for many years, the premier diamond in the treasury of her personal preferences. It was in Maria Feodorovna's hands that the adornment experienced its golden age, transforming from a fashionable accessory into a living part of the Romanov house's history. The Empress, known for her dynamic character, prized the tiara for its practicality. Unlike the weighty, monumental crowns of the past, this tiara was lively and almost ethereal. It didn't constrain, it complemented, allowing the Empress to maintain naturalness and grace during long court ceremonies, diplomatic receptions, and family celebrations. For Maria Feodorovna, a princess of Württemberg who became one of the most influential Russian empresses, this tiara was akin to a vow of allegiance to her new homeland. It wasn't just jewelry, but a talisman, connecting her to the land she now ruled. By wearing the golden stalks of wheat, she wore Russia itself, powerful, fertile, and indomitable. The tiara became her calling card, an unmistakably recognizable symbol of her authority and taste. When Maria Feodorovna appeared in public wearing it, everyone understood. Before them was not merely a woman adorned with jewels, but the mother of the empire. Over time, the piece began to acquire personal stories. It witnessed her children growing up, the changing eras and political alliances. The tiara was with Maria Feodorovna during moments of supreme triumph, when news of victories over Napoleon flowed into St. Petersburg, and during hours of quiet sorrow. It absorbed its wearer's emotions, becoming a silent witness to her life. One can only guess how many state secrets were whispered in halls where light reflected off its flawless white sapphire. Maria Feodorovna's admiration was so profound that she transformed the tiara from a personal treasure into a dynastic talisman. It was she who initiated the tradition that wheat-stalk tiaras, as symbols of fertility and marital happiness, became an integral part of the dowry of the Grand Duchesses of the Romanov house. She wanted her granddaughters, upon marrying and departing for foreign lands, to carry a piece of Russia with them, a blessing from their native soil for a happy life. Thus, the Russkoye Polye tiara ceased to be unique. Others were created in its image and likeness, perhaps not as perfect, but carrying the same deep meaning. The original, however, remained the gold standard, an unsurpassed masterpiece against which all subsequent variations were measured. During this period, the tiara was at the peak of its glory. It was copied, admired, and set trends far beyond Russia's borders. This was its shining hour, the zenith of its history, after which shadows would slowly begin to gather. The golden age could not last forever. Clouds were already brewing behind the splendor of the imperial court, and soon the crimson storm of revolution erupted, sweeping away not only the dynasty, but an entire world. In this new, harsh world, there was no place for treasures like the Russkoye Polye tiara, its history transformed from a palace chronicle into a confiscation record. The precious object, once a symbol of national pride, ended up in the cold vaults of the Gokran, where instead of admiring gazes, it awaited the stark assessment of the new regime's experts. And here unfolded the central scandal of its fate, a scandal of indifference and pragmatism. The commission deciding the fate of imperial treasures saw no particular historical value in the Duval brothers' tiara. To them, it was simply gold and stones that could be profitably sold to buy bread and weapons. In 1927, the auctioneer's hammer brought an end to this masterpiece's Russian history. It was sold for a pittance. An English syndicate, which bought Romanov treasures wholesale, fetched only £4,200 sterling for it, an amount incomparable not only to its artistic but also its material value. Records attest that throngs of foreign women clamored for those auctions, desperate to snatch up for a pittance a piece of the legendary opulence of the Russian empresses. And in this frenzy, this feverish excitement over the liquidation of a grand history, the Tiara's trail went cold. The collector who became its new owner chose to remain anonymous. Maria Feodorovna's Russian field tiara simply vanished, melting away into private collections and becoming a ghostly jewel for decades, remembered only by historians and connoisseurs. And just as the story seemed to vanish, the whispers and mysteries began. The original had disappeared, but the very concept of the wheat-sheaf tiara, conceived by Maria Feodorovna, continued to live on. Among European aristocratic families who had intermarried with the Romanovs, similar pieces were preserved, often as part of Grand Duchesses' dowries. One of these tiaras, owned by the Dukes of Hesse Castle, eventually began to generate its own legends. Many came to believe that this was indeed that miraculously preserved masterpiece by the Duval brothers. This myth proved incredibly persistent. For decades, historians and connoisseurs debated, attempting to match old photographs with rare descriptions. Was the Hessian tiara the very one sold by the Bolsheviks? Or was it one of its sisters, fashioned a tribute to its industrial might? This was a fresh take on an old story. Yes, we remember the past, but our present is grander, our gems are larger, and our gold shines brighter. Paradoxically, it was in the form of this ideologically aligned replica that the Russian field tiara reached the peak of its perceived value. The original was lost, its price a mere conjecture. But this new tiara, crafted from more precious and higher quality materials, became a visible, tangible treasure, accessible for public viewing. It resurrected the lost image into cultural circulation, cementing its place in history not as a phantom, but as one of the greatest masterpieces of Soviet jewelry art. It had returned to its homeland, never to depart again. So where are these fragments of a grand history today? Fate, like a skilled playwright, assigned each of the tiaras its own distinct finale. The original, the Duval brothers' masterpiece created for Maria Feodorovna, remains shrouded in mystery to this day. It is officially listed as lost. After its sale in 1927, its trail vanishes, and it has become a legend, a holy grail for collectors and jewelry historians. Its current status, a ghost. It exists only in a single old photograph and in archival documents. Its value is impossible to estimate, for the price of a legend is infinity. Should it ever resurface at auction, its price would shatter all world records, as nearly a century of quests and secrets would be added to the worth of its gold and unique sapphire. Its Soviet successor, the dazzling 1980 replica, by contrast, has found an eternal home and peace. This Russian field tiara is today a jewel in the diamond fund of the Moscow Kremlin. It is no longer an accessory, but a historical artifact of national importance, frozen in eternity behind bulletproof glass. Its mission is not to adorn, but to bear witness, to the grandeur of the past, to the skill of Soviet jewelers, and to the dramatic fate of its prototype. This piece will never be sold and has no market price. It is priceless, like other national treasures, because it belongs not to an individual, but to the history and culture of an entire country. And finally, the third tiara, the one often mistakenly taken for the original, the Hesse Castle tiara. This one, alone among the three, continues to live its authentic life. It is carefully preserved in the private collection of the Dukes of Hesse as their most cherished family heirloom. This is not a museum exhibit, but a living thread of history connecting generations. Its status, a wedding wreath, a symbol of love, memory, and spiritual resilience. When wearing it for their weddings, brides of the Hessian house don not merely a jewel, but the story of Alexandra Nikolaevna's tragic love and Princess Mafalda's courage. Its value to the family is not measured in money, it is measured in human destinies. Thus, today we have three incarnations of one masterpiece. One became a myth, the second a national treasure frozen in a display case. and only the third continues its mission, begun long ago by Maria Feodorovna, to bless new unions and carry within it a piece of great and tragic Russian history. So, let's return to the question where it all began: a lost masterpiece or a mysterious double? The answer proved far more complex and multifaceted than one could have imagined. The story of the Russian field tiara is not the story of a single piece of jewelry. It is an entire saga in 3 volumes, where each has its own fate, its own drama, and its own immortality. The first volume tells the tale of the original, the masterpiece crafted by the Duval brothers. It's a narrative of a national symbol's birth, its triumph, and its tragic vanishing act. This tiara became a phantom, a legend whose worth today resides less in its gold and jewels than in the very mystery of its whereabouts. It stands as the embodiment of lost grandeur, a silent rebuke to an era that squandered its treasures. The second volume unfolds the story of the Hessian tiara, its spiritual kin. This isn't merely a copy. It's a poignant standalone drama of a love cut short too soon and of a woman's incredible courage in defying evil. This tiara, buried for years to escape the Nazis, became a symbol not of imperial might, but of the unbreakable strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of family memory. And finally, the third volume features the Soviet-Russian field, a brilliant successor born into an entirely different era. This is a story of a symbol's resurrection, an attempt to reimagine the past and assert the grandeur of a new nation. This tiara stands as a monument not only to the art of jewelry, but also to the complex, contradictory history of the 20th century, where imperial legacy was reforged in the crucible of a new ideology. Ultimately, this saga transcends mere jewels. It is about the people whose destinies became interwoven with the cool brilliance of gold and diamonds. The Russian field tiara transformed into a mirror, reflecting the grand triumphs and terrible tragedies of an entire century. It is the physical embodiment of an empress's ambitions, the genius of master jewelers, the grief of a love-struck duke, the courage of a princess, and the ideological might of a superpower. Every curve of its golden wheat stalks holds more stories than many a historical chronicle. And though we may never lay eyes on the original, its narrative lives on. It continues to gleam in the display case of the Diamond Fund and to bless the brides of the Hessian house. For true treasures are not kept in vaults, they live in memory, and they are immortal.